Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, she's had wild success in the financial services industry, but she's discovered that life is not about its success, it's about significance. Her incredible story just ahead.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, I think most of us are like this. We're climbing some little hill or mountain. We get to the very top of the hill or mountain and we look around and say, is this all there is? And that perfectly describes my next guest. She's been wildly successful in financial services. Erin Botsford is in the studio. She's the heads up the Advisor Authority. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jeff.
Absolutely. So we're going to spend some time together. I want to start at the very beginning. You were not born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You didn't have it easy.
You might say that.
Tell us about the early days.
Yeah, I was born in Illinois. When I was 10, my dad decided to move to California to pursue his dream to have a clinic for early childhood education. We got out there 6 months after we got to California. He died of a massive heart attack in front of my mother and all 6 of us children. And he left my mom 6 kids and a $10,000 life insurance policy. So we went from middle class to broke overnight. And there's a lot of nuances to that, but, I bought everything I've ever owned since I was 11 years old, and I'm proud to say that. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. I remember my mother telling me, Erin, I can't help you. You're going to have to figure life out yourself, which was probably a gift in hindsight. And so when I was 16, I got my first job at McDonald's. A lot of people have worked at McDonald's, and something tragic happened that really changed my life. And I was on my way to work, and I was getting ready to make a left-hand turn, and I felt this boom. And I didn't know what had happened. It was a loud noise and a loud, boom. And I stopped the car, and I got out, and I went around, and there was a motorcycle embedded in the grill of my automobile. And I was like, but there was no motorcycle driver on the bike.
Wow.
And I was stunned. I didn't really know what had happened, but I looked around, and I saw this young man laying in a ditch, bleeding. And of course, I started screaming, and I knew this was bad. And 2 people came up, and the man came over to me to see how I was doing. And there wasn't even a scratch in my windshield.
Wow.
And I was fine. And they went over, the woman went to him. What turns out it was his parents. And they had gone out for a walk that morning. And he was only about 50 yards away from home. Because there were no witnesses to the car accident, I was actually charged with involuntary manslaughter by the state of California. And when you're charged with a crime, you have to defend yourself. And so my mother and I met with this man called an attorney. And he said to my mother, well, Mrs. McGowan, this is purely a matter of economics. If your daughter will plead guilty, I'll be happy to enter the plea at no charge. And she'll get whatever sentence the state of California hands down. But if your daughter wants to defend herself, it's going to cost you a lot of money. Well, I want you to picture being my mother with a 16-year-old and knowing what limits were, your options were so limited. So she literally picked up her purse, looked at the man and said, okay, my daughter will plead guilty. And I tell everybody, it was an out-of-body experience for me because I was a good girl. I was just on my way to work. And I said, please don't make me plead guilty, Mom. I'm a good girl, 4.0 student. And she looked at me with such sad eyes and said, honey, I'm so sorry. We have no money, and therefore we have no choice.
Wow.
And I always tell people that was the day that I learned money buys you choices or the lack thereof. Now, the good news is we went home and my older brothers and sisters were talking about me like I wasn't there. And my brother said, let's take a second mortgage. My mother had done one good thing with that $10,000, and she'd bought a home in Southern California. It had appreciated in value, and we were able to take a second mortgage out to pay for my defense. And very quickly, I was found not guilty. They had measured skid marks, and he was going 47 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. I was going 17. Unfortunately, the young man was 18. He had borrowed the motorcycle that morning, had never ridden before, and just lost control coming around, a curve. And so, unfortunately, then 3 weeks after the criminal trial was over, then the family of the young man sued my mom and me for just a ridiculous amount of money. And I remember my mother, she didn't handle it all that well, I have to admit, now that she's deceased. And I remember her looking at me and said, well, because of you, we might have to pitch a tent on the high school football field, because she thought we were going to lose the only asset which we owned, which is her home. So fortunately, the insurance company came in and they provided the defense, and we got through that. And I'll say, in hindsight, many good things came from it, but you could never see that in the immediate. One good thing is that a young man named Bob Botsford, he noticed me back in the day. My picture was on the front page of the newspaper. They didn't protect the identity of minors back then. And my husband, the man who became my husband, said, oh my gosh, that girl's in my algebra class. So it took a long time, because I was, I always say Bob Botsford, he dated and he married some pretty damaged goods, because there was no money for a psychologist. There was no money, back in the day, it was like, whatever happened, you just, put it under the rug and you never speak of it again.
Yes.
And in fact, we got married, he became an Air Force pilot, and we moved 17 times in the first 14 years we were married, which was really good because I was able to move away from all of that bad stuff. And I thought, as long as I didn't have to talk about it, it would never haunt me again or anything like that. So all these bases that we went to, none of my military friends, they had no idea where I had come from. And the first time I ever told my story was after I got into the financial services business, and I walked in looking for a job as a secretary. I had no self-esteem, no confidence. I'd come from nothing. What do I know about money or rich people, right? So this guy said, I'm going to make you a stockbroker. And I was like, okay, I don't know the difference between a stock, a bond, never heard of a mutual fund, but okay. I was young enough to say things like that. So I'm about 3 years into my stock brokerage career, and this couple comes in, and I'd been working with them for a while, and they came in very distraught, and they said that their son had been involved in an accident with a motorcyclist, and the motorcycle driver was killed. And I was thinking to myself, no, we're not going here, we're not going here, we're not doing this. And I had this just peace come over me, and they were distraught about being sued and their money, and their son was suicidal. And I very quietly said, I think I understand what you're going through.
Wow.
And they're looking at me like, how could you possibly understand? And so I told my story. And I mean, they just leapt across the table, and we hugged and we cried. And for me, it was the first time I had ever told that story.
Wow.
And it became really apparent that people want to work with real people. I mean, they became just great clients of mine, and we shared in our humanity, and because things like that happen. And one of the things, Jeff, I became an expert in, as I call it, risk management. So a lot of advisors, and now I teach advisors. So I sold my company, quite a few number of years ago, and I teach advisors because most advisors, all they focus on is the investment side of the equation. Retirement planning, stock options, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. I always start on the risk side because most people don't know they're one car accident away from potentially losing everything they've worked for.
Wow.
And so I've become an expert on, risk management. How do you, whatever assets you have, let's first figure out how to lock those down from things like a future divorce, liability suits, bankruptcies, creditor issues. And so, and I think that was God's gift to me because I understand how it feels to feel like you're going to end up in jail, maybe.
Yes.
That your parents are going to lose the only asset they have. What about people that are worth 20, 30, 40, $100 million? Their kids go out, they drive cars in their name, and they hit a plastic surgeon, and they're being sued for $25 million. Like, who's taking care of that side of the equation?
Wow.
So that's what I became an expert at.
I'm blown away by your journey, and I'm so sorry for all the tragedies. But
it's all good.
Yeah, it's shaped who you are today.
Yeah.
So we're going to pull up her website, and as we scroll down the website, let's talk about how you help others in your industry build their practice.
Yes, and so I created this online course, And it's got 5 different actually courses. It's the mindset of achievement and what do you want to have happen? What is the purpose for what you do? And I always have them think about on the last day you're in business, what happens?
Right.
Right? What is your exit strategy? And so a lot of advisors, they think of themselves as financial advisors, and I try and get them to think of themselves, I own a company, I own a business, and the business of that company is giving financial advice, right? And so positioning themselves as a business owner. The next one is I teach them how to close prospects of any size the first time they meet with them. And as you can imagine, when you operate on the risk side of the equation, like Jeff, I know if we got off the show,
Sure.
I could have you in tears in about maybe 5 minutes.
Sure.
And I could point out some things that you and your family might have missed
Yes.
in the risk management side. And what we want to do is we're not doing that to frighten or scare a prospect. We want to protect them.
Yes.
Right? How dare we take their money, and invest it and leave them unprotected over here, right? To these unforeseen risks that can happen. So we first talk about how to, and I think you should close prospects in the first meeting. Why? One, it's more efficient. And 2, we need to get the work done.
Yes.
And I've never met a prospect of any size that didn't need 4 or 5 things to have happen to protect them. And so I teach how to do that. Then the next course is all on prospecting. How do you find those ideal prospects to work with that will value, appreciate, and pay for your advice?
Yes.
And then I train their assistants because a lot of advisors are solo practitioners or they have 1 or 2 people working for them. Well, let's get your assistant doing all but a few things in your company. And then the last thing I teach them is once you've gotten from here, 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 and here, let's make sure that your business, you actually have created a business entity and you're set up for one day having an exit.
Yes.
And so it's a very comprehensive, I call it follow the yellow brick road, because there isn't a lot of great business building training in our industry. There's a lot of sales training, there's a lot of product training, but to take an advisor from, I just started yesterday, or I'm at $1 million, or I'm at 5 million, and I want to make sure I have a great exit someday.
Yes.
There's not a lot of training for that.
Wow, I can see why you're so successful. And you also have 2 best-selling books. We'll show the first one up on the screen, The Big Retirement Risk. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, I wrote that book in 2012 to answer the question, what do I do to make sure I don't run out of money in retirement? And the genesis of that is I had a brother who actually did run out of money in retirement. He had some very bad habits, and I remember thinking, the big risk is running out of money before you run out of time, and he ran out of money, so that's why I named it that. And so all I do is share what my investment philosophy was when I was in practice. And then the other book, I'm sure you're going to pull that up, Seven Figure Firm.
Yes, tell us about this book.
Yeah, and actually we are just, that's the 2nd edition. We just launched it. We're actually relaunching it in April this month. And that is from soup to nuts, a sort of an overview of what I teach in my online course. So
Yes.
it's a nice handy place for advisors to start.
And I know you have the heart of a teacher because I went on YouTube, and if you put in Erin Botsford into YouTube, there's dozens and dozens of podcasts that you've been on. One of them, we're going to put a clip up on the air here. Valerie Sokolowski is one of our longest serving podcasters, and so you were in our studios, I think 6 years ago. By the way, you haven't changed, so good job on skincare. But you do love to educate people, don't you?
I do.
Yeah, tell us about
it.
that part of it.
Well, I just think that being educated is the key to life, right?
Yes.
And staying in the dark is no fun. And I like to turn on the light bulb and have people see a vision of themselves that they never saw before.
Yes.
And you do that through educating them.
So we promised off at the top of the show that she would talk about turning success into significance. Let's talk about orphans in Africa, and we're going to show some pictures while you're talking. So how did this happen?
Well, Bob and I started going to Africa in 2009 on safari. In the first safari we went on, the lady who was leading the safari would often say, we're going to go out on a cultural experience. Sometimes it was a tribe, sometimes it was whatever. This time it happened to be, let's stop by an orphanage on our way out from Zambia to Botswana. So like, okay, that sounds cool. So we go to this orphanage, and the lady who ran it, there was about 12 couples, and we walked into this, she called it the baby home, and there were 40 babies and 20 cribs. And she said, can you all just hold babies? And we're like, of course we can. We're all parents. Yeah, we can. But the oddest thing is we walked in, and there was 40 babies and 20 cribs, and none of them were crying.
Mm.
And that's the oddest thing. And so I picked up a little boy, and Jeff, it was like picking up a dead baby.
Mm.
He was probably about 6-8 months years old, and there was no life. But in what I watched in real time, I watched his eyes. I watched him come alive. And I realized the importance of human touch. And I started holding him and cuddling and laughing. And I took my phone out and I showed him what he looked like. And the whole place went up for grabs. These kids were like laughing and some of them were crying. But when you realize, there was only one house mother for the 12 hours during the day and one at night. I mean, there's only so much they can do. And so babies learn very early on, there's no point in crying because nobody's coming for you.
Wow.
And so I watched a life come back to life, and it was like crazy. And so she took us to the next place, and she called it the toddler home. And these children, like, they could walk and talk, and they were just like little kittens, and they just couldn't get close enough. They were on your hair, and that was really interesting. The value of human touch cannot be overstated. And so then she had a girls' home, a boys' home. She had created 2 schools, a 40-acre farm. Her name was Ranji Chara. And at the end of our time, we were there for 4 or 5 hours, I don't know what, and it was time to go on our merry way. And I said, I wanted to take her aside. I said, Ranji, can you tell me, what does it take in US dollars? Like, what does it take? You've done amazing work here. I'm thinking it was millions of dollars. Right. And she goes, well, we do all of this. This is 2009 for about 400,000 US. I was like, wow, you do all of this for 400,000 US? And she goes, yeah. And so time to go. Bob and I got in the bus, and all of us were kind of crying or teary-eyed. I certainly was. And I looked at my husband. I said, oh my gosh, we can make a huge difference here. So from that point forward, we became a major donor. And I realized it was risky to the kids to become too much of a donor. That was our goal initially. I'm like, no, what happens to them if something happens to us? Right. So now we have a large number of donors that help us. And then that was 2009. Last year, a year and a half ago, 2023, we actually checked out a new orphan program, and I highly recommend everybody checks this out. It's called Zoe Empowers, ZOE, zoeempowers.org. And they have a whole different model. And their model is, we actually flew by helicopter to this very remote place, and they take the most vulnerable children from ages 16 to 23, and they put them in families of 25, and they teach them a business.
Wow.
Now, the interesting thing is when they first join a Zoe, they have to apply to become a Zoe kid. Zoe doesn't give them anything up front, which is very different from a lot of NGO models in Africa. They come get food, come get malaria nets. They give them an opportunity. And then for 9 months, they have to show up on regular basis with the 25, and they learn sexual abstinence. They learn, personal hygiene. They learn, and after 9 months, their first reward is 2 things, a warm blanket and a collection device for water.
Wow.
And we got to meet with these 25 children who all stood up and they all speak English and talk about how proud they were because they had to do this, 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 and this, but because they had accomplished that, these were their rewards. And they'd never had that experience before.
Wow.
They'd been given things, but not on the basis of merit, right? So after 9 months, then Zoe helps them based on where they live, what village, to create businesses. So one little girl, she had become a plumber. And I said, why did you decide to become a plumber? She goes, there's no female plumbers in our village. Shortly after she became a plumber, she decided she wanted to start a second business, which was a grocery store. So she went to the family, and Zoe helps them. They give them microloans. And she said, I need money for inventory. So they decide as a family, is she worthy of lending the money? They lent her the money, and we got to go to her store. And she had 200 products. She had flour and oil and salt and, sugar. And I said, well, how do you keep your store? Her store was just a little lean-to, right? Mm-hmm. I said, how do you keep your inventory safe at night? She goes, well, I hired a homeless man, and he sleeps in my store at night, and he protects my inventory. So she had created 2 jobs, hired a homeless man, and she was able to pay. She had 2 younger siblings, and she's paying their school fees, so they're back in school and they're not wandering the streets. Wow. So I said to the guy that I was with, I said, how much money do these kids make? They said, well, they make about equal to a teacher in Kenya. But the point is they will never be dependent on assistance anymore. They've found their way. And so I think I was so amazed by it. I said, are you guys in Zambia? Because Zambia is where our other orphanage was or is. And they go, no, but we'd really like to be. And I said, okay, tell me what the numbers would look like. And so he gave me a number. He said, let me sleep on it. Let me pray about it. And the next day I said, if Bob and I agree to support this mission, this project in Zambia, how many children's lives will be changed? And he said 4,000 to 5,000.
Wow.
In 3 years. I'm like, done. So we're into year 1 and going into year 2, and we're super excited about what they're doing. And Jeff, to put it in context, yes, Bob and I, since 2009, helped, between 500 and 1,000 children to stay alive, have an education, have 3 meals a day through the first orphanage. Zoe, over the same time period, has helped 225,000 kids become self-sufficient. So I do believe that the orphan model may be close to or maybe broken. I think this model of helping them become more self-sufficient is a way better way. But talk about education.
Yes.
It took me all these years to be educated on that. I always thought helping people and I think a lot of the dependency in Africa in particular has been caused by those of us, let's call it in the West, where it's just easier to write a check,
Right.
And make ourselves feel better than actually go get our hands dirty and really get in, dig deep.
Erin, I know you're passionate about helping financial advisors, but this is your true calling. Your eyes light up when you talk about this, and God bless you for everything that you're doing. In the minute left, why don't you talk to the viewer, the camera on the left, about finding a purpose for their life beyond the almighty dollar?
Yeah, I'm really big about that. I think there's a Bible saying that says, to whom much is given, much is expected, and there's nobody that's been given more than me. And I've always taught my financial advisors, I said, I believe anybody who's in business or any work you do, your work or your business should be the benefactor that allows you to have a great life and take care of the people and the causes that you care about. Because at the end of the day, we all end up in a little box someplace, and to me, I want to hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant, from my Lord someday. And it's just, to me, it's like helping other people who have no ability to help themselves is just the biggest bonus that I can think of.
Erin, you're one of my favorite guests of all time. Thank you. You really touched me. We're going to end with her website, which is erinbotsford.com. The great Erin Botsford. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
You bet. That's it for now. We'll see you next time.